Hello class, and welcome to what I believe is the second lecture for week 6. That's where you should be up to when you're watching this. But we've just finished our section on externalities, which were 2 lectures. Now, I have to say that I think externalities is probably the most important part of engineering economics. It is also potentially the most confusing. It is hard to get your head around the fact that that something may cost more than what you're paying because there are other costs which bystanders or third parties may pay. Well, anyway, that's where we get market failure, where we get inefficient market outcomes because we haven't allowed for externalities. Now, that's a very big part of civil engineering. Civil engineering projects tend to have very large externalities, large external benefits and large external costs. The main benefits of building 150 meter road will not be felt by the organization that's paying for it, but it will be felt by those who use the road, namely you and me. And the costs of the road will not merely be felt by those paying for it, namely the Ministry of Transportation, but it will be felt globally by the increase in CO2 emissions. That's going to reduce people's quality of life, and there's a cost associated with that. That's externalities. Well, that's why governments need to intervene and offer subsidies or Coase theorem or regulation to try and internalize external costs and benefits. But there are other things which have such huge externalities, the government needs to fund them solely, completely. And this is something called a public good or a common resource. So we're going to talk about that this week. What is a public good and what is a common resource? Why do governments fund them entirely? It's because of externalities, effectively. And this is why most civil engineering projects, unless you're building a building, let's say a high-rise hotel apartment or something, most projects you will be involved in civil engineering, the government will be sponsoring the project. So things like roads or pipelines or water treatment facilities or dams, the government will be paying for it because it's under this concept of public goods or common resource. So that's my name. Don't know why I have these stupid animations on these slides. Anyway, so learning objectives for today, we're going to be learning about what is a public good and what is a common resource, and we're going to be able to give examples of each. You're going to be able to categorize what is a public good, what is a common resource, what is the difference. We're also going to talk about why markets generally fail to provide efficient amounts of these goods. Effectively, it's because of externalities. If most of the benefit is external rather than internal profit, no investor is going to build it. And so this is why governments need to get involved in funding such projects. Now, we're going to be talking also about how governments can improve market outcomes in the case of public goods or common resources. So, an introduction. There are many goods in the world that if you use them, you pay nothing for them. So when I go to Sami Abdul Rahman Park, probably not a good example while Sami Abdul Rahman Park is closed for quarantine, but anyway, I don't pay for the benefit of the park. I just go in there and I enjoy it. National defense is another thing. I don't pay an individual soldier to give me security in my household. I don't do that. Instead, I get the benefit of living in a country that has an effective military, the Peshmerga. Now, I am paying for that indirectly through taxes, but for the most part, we get the benefits of the Peshmerga, the national defense, without paying for it, not directly at least. Also, clean air and water, are they goods? Well, absolutely, because we consume them, even though we may not pay for them, and we get the benefit from it. So we need to keep in mind that there are many goods out there that we do not pay for. And a lot of civil engineering infrastructure we do not pay for. More on that later. Now, when goods are completely free, the market forces that would normally allocate resources to find an efficient outcome, where we have a supply and demand curve and they intersect and there's a price we pay and there's a quantity that's consumed at an efficient allocation of resources, that just does not happen when the good is free. Basically, no one is willing to supply it, and everyone is willing to demand it. And so basically it's a situation where there is no supply line naturally. And so how do we then find an optimum solution? Basically, because all of the benefits are external, no one's willing to supply. Now, so the private market cannot produce an efficient optimum quantity of consumption according to the social need, according to the Pareto optimality, if you remember that term. So basically, the externalities means that the efficient amount of the good is not being produced. So this is why governments need to interact to improve the market outcomes. Is there benefit in terms of external benefits in the city having public parks? Well, absolutely, definitely. First off, it keeps everyone healthy, so there's less sick days, so everyone benefits. It also improves the quality of life, which means Erbil is a desirable place to live. Potentially you wouldn't get any staff members from overseas working at the faculty at UKH if there wasn't any parks or any kind of recreation available in Erbil. People would come and work for 1 year and then they will want to leave. And so there's a lot of benefit to having a city park. But it's all external benefit, isn't it? How can we utilize that external benefit and gain it? Well, you can't leave a park to a private company. No private company is going to build Sami Abdul Rahman Park if they can't charge a price for it. And that works in some places, but the moment you charge any kind of price for parks, potentially the numbers of people using the park will diminish greatly, because there's an expectation in society that those things should be provided for free. So how can you solve this? Well, governments need to intervene because the market isn't producing an efficient outcome of consumption. That's why the government pays for parks like Sami Abdul Rahman Park. So there's some important characteristics of goods. Now, some goods are excludable. Now, what does it mean if a good is excludable? That means you can stop people from using it. You can exclude people. So let's say I go to Abdul Lafif Ice Cream with Shana, and the manager sells me an ice cream, but Shana isn't willing to pay, and so the manager doesn't give her an ice cream. She has been excluded. Now, what about something like dial-up internet? Again, I would pay for a service, and I would be given dial-up internet in my apartment. And I will be given a password, meaning that only me, the person who has paid for the internet, can use it. So Dr. Dara, who lives upstairs from me, he can't steal my internet. And that's a good thing, because Dr. Dara is the sort of person who would steal your internet, just so you know. But if I didn't have that password, anyone within proximity to the signal could use the internet. So that's why we have passwords, to make the good excludable. But not excludable goods would include something that if it was purchased by anyone, the people who are bystanders will get the benefits of that good, even though they haven't paid for it. So let's say I buy... This actually happened when Wi-Fi became a thing. When Wi-Fi first happened, it sort of started coming out at around 2006, 2007 Wi-Fi, and we thought it was really cool that you didn't need to plug in a laptop. It was really cool back then. I know you were all probably 3 or 4, but I was at university, and it was quite a big thing for us, not having our laptops plugged in and we could get on the internet. But initially, they didn't have passwords. That meant that my roommate at university, he bought Wi-Fi, and he couldn't stop me from using the Wi-Fi. Even though I didn't pay for it, he couldn't stop me. I wasn't excluded. And so very quickly, no one wanted to buy Wi-Fi because they just hoped their neighbor would buy it. And so very quickly, the Wi-Fi companies thought, we need to find a way to make the good excludable so that only people who pay us will get the benefit of the product. And so they basically created a system of passwords. Now, other things which are not excludable would be something like the FM radio signals. So who pays for FM radio signals? Well, it's a combination of government subsidies, but it's also people paying subscriptions. But the thing is, you can't put a border around a radio signal. If I don't pay for the subscription, I can still get the radio signal. And so it just becomes an ethical thing to pay for the subscription to get the radio, which people generally don't do. And that's why governments need to support FM radio stations, because it does not work in the private sector, because it's not excludable. Basically, if a good is not excludable, the demand for a product, meaning people's willingness and ability to buy the product, will shift to zero. The demand curve will shift towards the y-axis and disappear, because basically no one is willing to buy the product, because they just want someone else to buy it and they can get the benefit. And so there is no intersection between that demand and that supply curve. And so the free market doesn't actually produce an efficient outcome. National defense as well. Now, let's say Um, yeah, let's say Kurdistan was starting itself off as a country. Let's say we go back to 1991, I think, when the KRG first became a thing, and they said, well, we need to have an army, the Peshmerga, to support us. Who's going to pay for it? Well, I thought, well, most of you were probably thinking, yeah, we need an army, but I'm not going to pay for it. Let someone else pay for it, and I will get the benefits. Because the national defence is not like a personal bodyguard. They give defence to the entire country. So if a few people buy it, everyone else gets the benefit of it. And so it's not excludable. So the few people who will buy it, they just don't exist because they keep saying, oh, someone else will buy it. That's why national defence needs to be a government expenditure, because the demand is zero in the free market, because no one is willing to pay and buy it, because they know they just want someone else to buy it for them. That's when a good is not excludable. Now, we've talked about exclusivity. I now want to talk to you about rival. A good is rival in consumption if one person's use or consumption of the good diminishes other people's use of the good. So what are some examples of that? Well, one example would be ice cream. Let's say Shana, you mentioned you prefer examples of ice cream rather than civil engineering because it's less complicated. So this one's for you. Let's say Shana goes into Abu Afif ice cream and she buys an ice cream. You can probably hear my daughter in the background. What happens when she buys an ice cream? It means there's going to be less ice cream for the rest of us. If I go into Abu Afif ice cream after Shana, there will be less ice cream in the shop than there was to begin with. The more that Shana consumes, the less ice cream there is for everyone else. That is called a rival good. Now, some goods are not rival. So an example of this would actually be something like Sami Abdul Rahman Park. If Shana went to Sami Abdul Rahman Park and she was in the park and enjoying the park, she went for a walk around the trees, maybe had a picnic, took selfies of herself and her friends, and then I'm going to go to the park with my family an hour later. I'm not going to say, Shana used up all the park. There's less park than there was to begin with. Of course not, because it doesn't it doesn't diminish. Whether Shana is there before me or not doesn't diminish the park experience for me. That is a good that is non-rival. Now, consider this. Let's say a park was made, that Sami Abdul Rahman Park was made by a private company, and they charged $1 for every entrance fee. So you pay $1 US for every time you go into the park. Now, there is no limit for Sami Abdul Rahman Park, because it's a massive park, on how many people can use the park. Now, are they going to think about if their supply curve is basically completely inelastic? It's a straight line. They are not going to think, let's build another park, because effectively they would be that it doesn't mean they're going to get more customers, because effectively it's not rival. There is no limit on the number of people who can use the park. Well, yeah, until it gets really crowded, you may say, but yeah, for the sake of argument, Let's say it doesn't. So what does that mean? If it was left to the private market, there would not be enough supply. A company would build no more than maybe one park, and there would never be any other parks built. Because they feel that they can get the same profit from same revenue from one park as if they built a second one. So why would they build a second park? The end result is that the private market cannot produce an efficient outcome for the amount of consumption of a good, in this case a park. That's why governments need to build parks. So this is very related to externalities, isn't it? A lot of goods which have big externalities are often excludable, not excludable, and also they are not rival. If a good is not excludable and not rival, the private market is really going to struggle to bring about an efficient outcome, and that's why governments need to fund these things like FM radio signals, national defence, parks, and a lot of civil engineering infrastructure. That's why economics is a module for civil engineers. Roads, highways, bridges, dams. The government will be building these. So let's have a look at this in table form. So remember, rival means if I consume the good, does it reduce or diminish the amount of good available to everyone? And excludable, that means that only the people paying for the good can use it. Well, let's consider certain goods which would fit into those four quadrants. If a good is both rival and excludable, this is something that we would call a private good. So an example of this would be ice cream. Is it excludable? Yes. Only the people who pay for the ice cream get ice cream. It's not as if Shana goes into Abu Afif, buys an ice cream, and suddenly all of us have ice creams. That would be great, but it doesn't happen. Clothing too. If Shana buys clothing, that doesn't mean that suddenly I have new clothes magically. No. And it's rival too. Shana buys ice cream, there's less ice cream for the rest of us. Shana goes to LC Waikiki and buys clothing, there's going to be less clothes in the shop for everyone else. So that's called a private good, and these goods are traded effectively, for the most part, quite efficiently by the free private market. There may be some externalities which need government interference to internalize the externalities. So we talked about subsidies for solar panels and things like that in last week when we talked about externalities. But what about if something is rival, meaning if you consume the good, there's less of the good for everyone else, but it's not excludable, meaning that you can only stop you can stop people who don't pay for it from using the good. Well, one of those examples is actually fish in the ocean. Is it rival? Yes. So if I forget where the south of what south of Iraq is called. I think it's called Shatt al-Arab. If I go to Shatt al-Arab, if we all go there in the summer, let's say, and I go out early in the morning and I go fishing from Shatt al-Arab, and I catch a fish for my breakfast. Now, does that mean there is now less fish in the ocean for everyone else? Yes, there's one less fish, so it's rival. But is it excludable? No, it isn't. Basically, anyone can go and fish in the ocean. It's very hard to make the ocean excludable. You can't put borders around the ocean and make it private property. No, it's a free-for-all. Another example of that would actually be oil fields, which actually often reservoirs often go under international borders. So there is actually in Kirkuk, that oil reservoir, it's a massive reservoir that actually goes under the border into South Iraq and also into Iran. Now, if the KRG really works its fields really hard, sorry, that's actually a bad example because I think Kirkuk is no longer part of the KRG for the time being. If Iraq worked the Kirkuk field really hard and pumped a lot of oil out of the ground, that would actually mean there would be less oil in that reservoir for Iran. They have an oil field over the same reservoir on their side of the border. Now, so it's rival, but it's not excludable, meaning that just because you're pumping oil out of the ground here in Iraq, that doesn't mean you can stop Iran from doing exactly the same. It's a common resource. Now, another thing would be the environment. Let's think about this. So let's think of the environment as a resource. Well, think of the forests, for example. That's actually a resource. I could exploit that and start cutting down trees and using the wood for fuel or for heating or for building things. And is it rival? Yeah, if I cut down a tree, there's going to be less trees for everyone else. Is it excludable? Well, unless you have private property, no. Basically, anyone is free to cut down trees if there isn't laws preventing you. And so it's not excludable. And so basically that can lead to exploitation and overuse. This is all called common resources. So you may have heard this, that capitalism, which is basically government systems that favor free market enterprise and letting the private market lead the way for the most part, that actually leads to pollution in the environment. It leads to trees being cut down. It leads to oceans being overfished. It all comes down to this idea of common resources, where basically, because it's rival, you want to go and cut down that tree or catch that fish before someone else does. At the same time, you're not excluded. No one's excluded, so everyone's doing this. And so basically, we're diminishing the rainforests. We're draining the ocean of its fish. We're polluting the atmosphere with CO2. This is because of the effect that common resources are not excludable and yet rival. Now, what happens if something is non-rival but it is excludable? Well, this is something called a natural monopoly. So you may have heard of natural monopolies before. This is something where basically there is one company, one organization, or even one government agency providing the good. And it's non-rival and yet it is excludable. So of the two examples there, we have fire protection. So first off, fire protection, is it rival? Well, no, it isn't. If I have fire protection in my apartment, if in my apartment building, and I use the fire protection, basically, I have a small fire in my kitchen and the sprinkler goes on and it puts out the fire, that's not going to reduce the fire protection for my colleagues, Dara or Kamran or or Abbas, who also live in the same apartment. So it's not rival. Is it excludable though? Well, yes, it is. You only the company or the organization that gives this fire protection basically only has to give it to people who want to buy it. And so long as everyone in my building buys the fire protection, or which we do, we're forced to, it's part of our rent, then we all get the benefit of it. Another example is cable TV. If I buy a cable television or satellite television, does that mean there's less satellite television for everyone else? Well, no, absolutely not. Is it excludable? Well, yeah, because you need to buy the satellite television in order and get the password in order to get the benefit of watching all those good channels with all of the best TV. So it's excludable, but it's not rival. So let's think about this here. Why would there only ever be one company or one organization or one government agency that would provide cable television? Well, if suddenly another company emerged offering cable TV, would they actually be able to provide something new? Well, no, they wouldn't, because it would have all the same TV channels as the original cable TV company, and basically the original TV company, its product is non-rival. They are not limited on the amount of cable TV they can sell. So in this case, the supply curve is perfectly, and I mean perfectly, inelastic. Basically, the quantity that they are willing to sell will change regardless of the price. The price that is profitable for them is set, and then however many people are willing to buy it, that will determine the equilibrium. But it's a perfectly straight, inelastic supply. So there's no opportunity for a competitor to come in and offer cable TV, because if they offer it at a lower price, well, that just means you're going to split the number of people using cable TV between two companies, and so basically neither company will be making a profit. And so this is what's called a natural monopoly. Now, the final one here is basically a public good. This is where the good is neither rival nor excludable. So let's think of a few examples here. In the Midwest of the USA, so this is where Dr. Joe is from. Dr. Joe spent most of his life in Missouri, Mississippi, Kansas, and a little bit of time in Texas, I believe, but I think he lives mostly these days in Missouri. Now, I don't know how much you know of the Midwest, but the middle states of America, they have a real big problem with tornadoes. And when these tornadoes get really strong, they can actually destroy towns. They lift houses right off their foundations and completely flatten houses. So when there is a tornado coming, you want to get in your car and drive as far away as possible, because it's danger. You could lose your life. Now, what happens in these towns in the Midwest is they have what's called tornado sirens, where basically a big siren in the city will go off, and that will alert everyone get out, a tornado is coming. Now, is it rival? Well, no, because effectively, if I hear the tornado siren, that doesn't mean that Hummer is going to hear less siren. No, if the siren is blasting, we're all going to get the benefit of that. So who's going to want to buy it? Well, no one really, because they just hope someone else will pay for it, and then we will get the benefit of it. Because it's also not excludable. We can't have a subscription fee for the tornado siren where the mayor goes around the city and says everyone chip in, we'll pay for this tornado siren, and those of you who don't pay, well, we're going to tell you to block your ears so you don't hear the tornado siren. No, that doesn't work. You can't exclude people who don't pay. And so there's no incentive to pay. So effectively, a public good, something like a tornado siren, it would never be built if it was left to the private market. And so all of the external benefits of a tornado siren, meaning that people would escape and save their lives when a tornado is coming, that would not happen under a free market. National defense is another one. I get the benefit of living in a country with the Peshmerga, with national security. It means I felt safe moving here, even as there was a war raging only less than 50 kilometers away in Mosul with ISIS. I wasn't concerned about that because of the national defense, the Peshmerga. Did I pay for it? No. Did I get the benefit of it? Yeah. Was it non-rival? No. Was it rival? No, it wasn't. Someone else has paid for it and I get the full benefit of it. And is it excludable? No, I couldn't be stopped from getting the benefit of the Peshmerga. So, Peshmerga, tornado sirens, is anyone in the private market going to pay for these things? Not a chance. You need to get a government to actually organize and pay for these things in public expenditure in order to get the full benefit, those external benefits. Now, that's why most civil engineering projects are actually public goods. You have things like roads, you have things like wastewater pipelines, dams for electrical generation and other things. Civil engineers, their client, the sponsor for the project will normally be the government because they're building public goods. But those who benefit from the project, well, it's everyone who's going to use the road or everyone who's going to flush a toilet. They will get the benefit of that public good. Now, there is one other example there across all of them, and this has to do with roads. So think about it. All of the roads in Kurdistan, they are what is called a non-toll road. That means you don't have to pay to go on the road. So this is quite a common thing in the USA, where there's a lot more free market and less government interference. There are a lot of roads that run all through the USA, where you have to pay a fee every time your car goes on the road, and so it's user pays. That's called a toll road. A toll is just a word for a payment. There's a cost to using the road. Now, all of the roads in Kurdistan are non-toll roads. So, is it excludable? Well, no, it isn't. Anyone can go on the road. You're not stopping people who don't pay from going on the road. Is it non-rival? Well, so long as it's uncongested, there's no traffic jam, it is non-rival. That means if I use the road, it doesn't diminish the benefit for a van using the road, let's say. A van, if I drive on a 100-meter road to get to university, and then and I get to the university at 8:30 like I normally do, and then half an hour later a van is driving on a 100-meter road to get to the university, she's not going to say, Mr. Collins has used up all of the roadness. No, she's not. The road is still there, and it's still in a perfectly good condition for a van to use. That is a public good. It is non-rival, and it is non-excludable. Now, what happens as the road gets congested, as it gets busier and there's traffic jams? Well, so long as you're not paying for the road and no one can be stopped from going on the road, so it is still non-excludable. Anyone can go on the road. However, now that it's congested, now that there's traffic jams, if I go on the road, that is going to diminish the utility or the benefit of the road for others. Because the more people who use the road, the lower the road benefit is for us. Because the benefit of a 100-meter road for me is currently that I can get to a lot of places in the city quicker than if the road wasn't there. If it becomes crowded, the more cars that go on the road will slow down my journey time. And so, is it rival? Yes. People's use of the road diminishes the benefit I can get from the road. Just like if Shana buys ice cream at Abu Afif, she's going to diminish the amount of ice cream available for other people. And if the road is congested, then it's going to diminish the amount of benefit from the road for other people. So suddenly, when it becomes crowded, it moves from being a public good to a common resource. So what can people do then to try and reduce the congestion on a non-toll road so that it becomes rival again? Well, you could build another road to take away a lot of the traffic, which is what they're doing right now. There's a lot of traffic on a 100-meter road. They predict there's going to be a lot of traffic on a 120-meter road, so they're going to build a third road, a 150-meter road, to the north of the city. But another thing you could do, if the country had no money, the government had no money, doesn't seem too far-fetched, is that they could start charging a toll. They could set up gates for the road, and anyone who wanted to go on a 100-meter road would need to pay 250 dinar or 500 dinar every time they drove on the road. What's that going to do? Well, immediately there's probably going to be more congestion on 60-meter road, but it's going to free up 100-meter road. There will be less traffic. And so it becomes non-rival again. If one more car uses the road, it's not going to diminish the road benefit for other users. And but what you've done is you've made it excludable. You are now excluding people who don't pay. They can't use the good. So you've moved it from being a common resource to a natural monopoly. Now, what happens when even though there's a toll, it becomes congested again? Well, basically it becomes a private good, and then effectively it becomes like the free market with supply and demand, and private companies will probably think about building their own motorways to make money, because a motorway will effectively be like a business. So that's where that example comes from. Remember these two terms, rival and excludability. I think that's enough for us for today. Now, I'm going to actually photocopy pages 106 and 111 from Alan Anderton's book Economics, and that'll be available on Moodle. I really recommend you take some time to read this. I've tried to make this lecture shorter so that you will have more time to read. That's my intention. There's also a crash course for economics video about public goods, which I've put the link on Moodle for as well. Now, with Alan Anderton's book on economics, it's a great book, but unfortunately I can't, because of copyright, I can't just keep photocopying pages from it. So I'm photocopying externalities and public goods and common resources, which I think I'm allowed to do. I think it's under 1% of the total book, which means it's okay. I'm allowed to do it legally. They're not going to throw me in jail. And any more than that, the university could get in trouble. But I'll be photocopying key pages from economics, Alan Anderton's book on economics today, and that'll be put on Moodle. So thank you and goodbye. Contact me if you have any questions about public goods and common resources. God bless.